Maya Chen adjusted her blazer nervously as she stood outside the imposing glass doors of Park Industries. At 26, she had already made a name for herself as a rising star in financial consulting, but today felt different. Today, she was meeting her boyfriend James's family for the first time. James Park, heir to the Park Industries empire, had been dating Maya for 8 months. Their relationship had blossomed from a chance encounter at a charity gala where Maya's sharp wit and business acumen had immediately caught his attention. Despite their different backgrounds, they had found common ground in their shared ambitions and values. The elevator ride to the 52nd floor felt eternal. Maya's reflection in the polished steel doors showed a confident young woman with natural hair styled professionally, wearing a navy blue suit that spoke of success and determination. She had worked hard to get where she was, earning her MBA from Wharton and building her reputation through dedication and brilliance. James met her at the reception area, his warm smile immediately calming her nerves. "You look beautiful," he whispered, taking her hand. "My mother is going to love you." Maya wished she shared his confidence. She had heard whispers about Mrs. Park's traditional views and high expectations for her son's future wife. The Park family had built their fortune over 3 generations, starting from humble beginnings in Seoul before expanding to become one of New York's most influential business dynasties. As they walked toward the executive conference room where lunch was being served, Maya reminded herself of her accomplishments. She belonged here, regardless of what anyone might think. Her father had always taught her to stand tall and proud, never letting others' prejudices define her worth. The heavy oak doors opened, revealing an elegantly appointed room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Manhattan. Mrs. Park sat at the head of the table, her silver hair perfectly styled, wearing a cream-colored Chanel suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. Mrs. Eleanor Park's eyes swept over Maya with the precision of a jeweler examining a questionable stone. The silence stretched uncomfortably as James made the introductions, his hand protectively placed on Maya's lower back. "Mother, I'd like you to meet Maya Chen," James said, his voice carrying a note of pride that made Maya's heart flutter despite her nervousness. Eleanor's perfectly manicured eyebrow arched slightly. "Chen?" she repeated, her tone suggesting she was tasting something unpleasant. "That's interesting. And what exactly do you do, dear?" Maya straightened her shoulders, drawing on years of boardroom experience. "I'm a senior financial consultant at Morrison & Associates. I specialize in international market analysis and corporate restructuring." "How quaint," Eleanor replied, her smile as sharp as broken glass. "James has always been drawn to charitable causes." The insult hit its mark, but Maya maintained her composure. She had faced worse in male-dominated boardrooms and emerged victorious. James's jaw tightened visibly, but Maya squeezed his hand gently, signaling she could handle this herself. "Actually, Mrs. Park, I find my work quite fulfilling. Last quarter, I helped 3 Fortune 500 companies optimize their overseas investments, resulting in a combined profit increase of $47 million. Eleanor's expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes. "How impressive. And your family background? I assume they're also in consulting?" The way she said consulting made it sound like a euphemism for something distasteful. Maya felt the familiar fire building in her chest, the same determination that had driven her to excel despite every obstacle placed in her path. "My family has diverse interests," Maya replied diplomatically, choosing not to elaborate. She had learned long ago that some people's minds were already made up, regardless of facts presented to them. James cleared his throat. "Shall we sit down for lunch? The chef has prepared something special." Lunch proceeded with the tension of a diplomatic summit between warring nations. Eleanor Park wielded her questions like surgical instruments, each one designed to expose what she perceived as Maya's inadequacies. Maya answered with professional grace, but she could feel the weight of judgment pressing down on her shoulders. "Tell me about your education," Eleanor said, delicately cutting her salmon. "Where did you attend university?" "I completed my undergraduate degree at Columbia, then earned my MBA from Wharton," Maya replied, noting how Eleanor's fork paused mid-air. "Scholarship student, I presume?" The question dripped with condescension. James set down his water glass with more force than necessary. "Mother, that's hardly—" "It's fine, James," Maya interrupted smoothly. "Actually, I was fortunate enough to receive both academic and merit-based scholarships, which covered about 60% of my costs. My family handled the remainder." Eleanor's laugh was like crystal breaking. "How resourceful! I'm sure your parents worked very hard to afford such luxuries." The word luxuries hung in the air like smoke. Maya felt something cold settle in her stomach as she realized the true nature of this interrogation. This wasn't about her qualifications or compatibility with James. This was about something much more fundamental and ugly. "They did work hard," Maya said quietly. "They taught me that education and integrity are the most valuable inheritances parents can give their children." "Indeed," Eleanor murmured, her attention turning to James. "Darling, didn't you mention you had that meeting with the Yamamoto family next week? Their daughter Yuki is such a lovely girl, accomplished, well-bred, and from such a respectable family." James's face flushed with anger. "Mother, we've discussed this. I'm not interested in arranged introductions." Eleanor's smile was serene and implacable. "Of course, dear. I'm simply thinking of what's best for the family legacy." Maya understood perfectly. The message was crystal clear, delivered with the precision of a master manipulator. The remainder of lunch felt like an endurance test. Eleanor Park continued her subtle assault, each comment carefully crafted to undermine Maya's confidence while maintaining plausible deniability. Maya had encountered racism before, but rarely had it been packaged so elegantly in designer clothing and refined mannerisms. "James tells me you're quite ambitious," Eleanor said as dessert was served. "Though I do worry about young women today, so focused on careers that they forget about family responsibilities." "I believe a woman can excel in both areas," Maya replied, her voice steady despite the storm brewing inside her. Eleanor's laugh was particularly grating this time. "Oh, my dear child, you're so naive. Some people are simply born to different stations in life. It's not personal, it's just natural order." The mask was slipping now, revealing the ugly truth beneath the polished exterior. Maya felt James tense beside her, his breathing becoming shallow with suppressed rage. "Mother," James said, his voice dangerously low, "I think you've said enough." "Have I?" Eleanor's eyes glittered with malicious amusement. "I'm simply being honest about reality. This little fantasy of yours is charming, James, but eventually you'll need to face facts about appropriate matches." Maya stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the marble floor. The sound echoed in the suddenly silent room like a gunshot. She had reached her limit, and years of professional restraint were crumbling under the weight of accumulated insults. "Mrs. Park," Maya said, her voice carrying a new edge that made Eleanor's smug expression falter slightly. "I think there's been a fundamental misunderstanding here." James rose as well, his hand finding Maya's. "Maya, you don't have to—" "No, James. I think I do." Maya's eyes locked with Eleanor's, and for the first time since entering the room, she allowed her full personality to shine through the diplomatic facade. Maya's transformation was subtle but unmistakable. The nervous young woman who had entered the room was gone, replaced by someone who carried herself with the quiet confidence of inherited power. Eleanor Park, for all her social acuity, sensed the shift, but couldn't quite identify its source. "Mrs. Park, you've made several assumptions about me today," Maya said, her voice carrying a new authority. "You've assumed I'm here seeking your son's money, that my family lacks resources, and that I'm somehow beneath your social standards." Eleanor's smile became more strained. "I've simply been getting to know you, dear." "No, You've been conducting an interrogation designed to humiliate me." Maya's words were precise, each one carefully chosen. "You've questioned my education, my family's finances, and my worthiness to be in this room." James watched in fascination as Maya seemed to grow taller, more commanding. This was a side of her he'd glimpsed in business meetings but never seen fully unleashed. "I think you're being overly sensitive," Eleanor replied, but her voice lacked its earlier conviction. Maya smiled, and it was nothing like the polite expressions she'd worn throughout lunch. This smile held secrets, power, and a hint of something that made Eleanor shift uncomfortably in her chair. "Perhaps I should have introduced myself more completely," Maya said, pulling out her phone. "Maya Chen, senior partner at Morrison & Associates, MBA from Wharton, and—" She paused, scrolling through her contacts. "Daughter of Marcus Chen." Eleanor's face went blank. "Marcus Chen? You might know him better as the Marcus Chen who sits on the Federal Reserve Board. Or perhaps as the Marcus Chen who owns Chen Capital Management, which handles approximately $47 billion in assets." The color drained from Eleanor's face as the implications began to sink in. Maya continued, her voice never rising above conversational level, but each word landing with devastating precision. The silence in the room was deafening. Eleanor Park's carefully constructed world of assumptions crumbled like a house of cards in a hurricane. Maya watched the older woman's face cycle through disbelief, recognition, and finally, dawning horror as the full scope of her mistake became clear. "Chen Capital Management," Maya continued conversationally, "currently holds a 12% stake in Park Industries. My father acquired those shares about 3 years ago when your company needed emergency funding for the Singapore expansion." James stared at Maya in shock. In 8 months of dating, she had never mentioned her family's wealth or influence. He had fallen in love with her intelligence, her drive, her kindness, never knowing she came from a family that could buy and sell most corporations without blinking. Eleanor's hands trembled slightly as she reached for her water glass. I had no idea." "Of course you didn't," Maya said gently, but her words carried an undertone of steel. "You were too busy making assumptions based on my appearance to ask the right questions." The irony was exquisite. Eleanor Park, who prided herself on social connections and financial acumen, had just spent an hour insulting the daughter of one of Wall Street's most powerful figures, a man who, with a single phone call, could make or break the Park family's business empire. "Maya," James said softly, "why didn't you tell me?" She turned to him, her expression softening. "Because I wanted you to love me for who I am, not what my family owns. I've spent my entire life proving I'm more than just my father's daughter." Eleanor finally found her voice. "Miss Chen, I believe there's been a terrible misunderstanding." "Has there?" Maya's eyebrow arched in a gesture remarkably similar to Eleanor's earlier condescension. "Because I heard you quite clearly. Something about natural order and appropriate stations in life." The tables had turned completely, and everyone in the room knew it. Eleanor Park's mind raced as she calculated the potential damage of her afternoon's performance. Marcus Chen wasn't just wealthy, he was influential in ways that could destroy the Park family's carefully built empire. His connections reached into every major financial institution, government regulatory body, and international market. "Miss Chen," Eleanor began, her voice now stripped of its earlier arrogance, "I fear my words may have been misinterpreted." "Were they?" Maya interrupted, her tone remaining perfectly civil. "Because I recorded our conversation for my personal notes. I often do that in business meetings. Would you like me to play back the part where you laughed at the idea of me being with your son?" The blood drained from Eleanor's face. In the age of social media and viral videos, a recording of a prominent socialite making racist comments could destroy more than just business relationships. It could obliterate a family's entire social standing. James looked between the two women, finally understanding the full scope of what had transpired. His mother hadn't just insulted his girlfriend, she had potentially declared war on one of the most powerful families in American finance. "Maya," he said quietly, "I'm so sorry. I had no idea she would—" "I know you didn't," Maya replied, her voice softening as she looked at him. "You're not responsible for her choices." Eleanor's carefully maintained composure finally cracked. "What do you want?" she asked, the question coming out more desperate than she intended. Maya studied her for a long moment. "I want you to understand something, Mrs. Park. I don't need your son's money. I don't need your family's status. I don't need anything you have to offer except basic human respect." She stood, gathering her purse with deliberate calm. "James, I think I should go. This has been educational." "Maya, wait," James said, rising quickly. "Please don't let her ignorance ruin what we have." Maya paused at the door, looking back at Eleanor. "The choice isn't mine to make anymore." Eleanor Park sat alone in the conference room after Maya and James left, the weight of her catastrophic mistake settling over her like a suffocating blanket. She reached for her phone with trembling fingers, scrolling through her contacts until she found her husband's number. "Richard," she said when he answered, her voice barely above a whisper. "We have a problem." 20 minutes later, Richard Park stood in the same conference room, his face grave as Eleanor recounted the afternoon's events. As CEO of Park Industries, he understood the implications better than anyone. "You insulted Marcus Chen's daughter," he said slowly, as if speaking to a child. "The Marcus Chen who could destroy us with a single board meeting." "I didn't know," Eleanor protested weakly. "You didn't ask," Richard corrected harshly. "You made assumptions based on prejudice, and now our entire family's future is at risk." Meanwhile, in James's penthouse apartment across the city, a different conversation was taking place. Maya sat on his couch, still wearing her navy suit, while James paced the length of his living room like a caged animal. "I can't believe she said those things to you," he said for the third time. "I'm so ashamed of her behavior." Maya watched him with tired eyes. "James, sit down, please." He collapsed beside her, running his hands through his hair. "I love you, Maya. What my mother thinks doesn't change that." "Doesn't it?" Maya asked quietly. "Because she's not going to change her mind about me. If anything, learning about my family's wealth will make her more resentful, not less." "Then we'll deal with it together," James said firmly. "I won't let her bigotry destroy what we have." Maya's phone buzzed with a text message. She glanced at it and sighed. "My father wants to have dinner tomorrow night. He's heard about today." James felt his stomach drop. How could he have heard already? "Marcus Chen has eyes and ears everywhere," Maya replied, "especially when it comes to his daughter's welfare." Marcus Chen's office occupied the entire top floor of the Chen Capital Management Building, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of Manhattan's financial district. At 58, he possessed the kind of quiet power that moved markets and toppled governments without ever raising his voice. Maya sat across from her father's massive mahogany desk, feeling like a child called to the principal's office, despite being a successful adult. Marcus studied her with the same analytical intensity he brought to billion-dollar deals. "Tell me about this young man," he said finally, his voice carrying the slight accent that remained from his childhood in Hong Kong. "His name is James Park. He's intelligent, kind, and treats me with respect," Maya replied. "I love him." Marcus nodded slowly. "And his family?" Maya's jaw tightened. "His mother is a bigot who thinks I'm a gold digger unworthy of her precious son." "I see." Marcus leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled. "Eleanor Park. I've heard of her. Old money pretensions built on new money foundations. Her husband Richard is competent, but lacks vision." "Daddy, what are you planning?" Maya asked, recognizing the calculating look in her father's eyes. "Nothing dramatic," Marcus assured her, "but perhaps it's time the Park family understood the consequences of their prejudices." Across town, Richard Park was having an emergency meeting with his board of directors. The conference room buzzed with nervous energy as he explained the situation. "Chen Capital Management holds 12% of our stock," Richard said grimly. "If Marcus Chen decides to dump those shares, it could trigger a market panic that destroys our stock price." Board member Harrison Webb, a silver-haired veteran of Wall Street, shook his head in disbelief. "Your wife insulted Marcus Chen's daughter? Richard, do you understand what kind of man we're dealing with? He once bankrupted a hedge fund because their CEO made a disparaging comment about Asian investors." "What do you suggest we do?" Richard asked. "Pray," Webb replied grimly, "and hope Eleanor can swallow her pride long enough to make a sincere apology." Marcus Chen made his first move with the precision of a chess grandmaster. At 9 a.m. sharp, Chen Capital Management announced they were reviewing their investment portfolio for strategic realignment. In Wall Street terms, this was equivalent to loading a gun and placing it on the table. Park Industries' stock price dropped 3% within the first hour of trading. Eleanor Park watched the financial news with growing horror, finally understanding that her afternoon of cruel entertainment was about to cost her family millions of dollars. Her phone rang constantly, friends, social contacts, and business associates all wanting to know what had happened to anger Marcus Chen. "Mrs. Park," her assistant said nervously, "Mr. Chen's office called. He's requesting a meeting at your earliest convenience." Eleanor's hands shook as she reached for her coffee cup. "Did he say what about?" "No, ma'am. But his assistant mentioned it was regarding mutual interests and future cooperation." Meanwhile, James sat in his own office, unable to concentrate on work as he watched his family's company hemorrhage value in real time. His assistant had fielded 6 calls from his father and 12 from various board members, all demanding to know what he knew about the Chen situation. Maya, for her part, was conducting business as usual at Morrison & Associates, though her colleagues couldn't help but notice the unusual number of congratulatory calls she was receiving from high-level contacts throughout the financial district. Word had spread quickly about Eleanor Park's spectacular miscalculation. "Maya," her assistant said, poking her head into the office, "your father's assistant called. He wanted me to remind you about dinner tonight and to tell you that Mrs. Eleanor Park has requested an audience." Maya looked up from her computer screen, a slight smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "An audience? How formal of her. Should I tell your father you'll be there?" "Yes," Maya replied, turning back to her screen. "Tell him I wouldn't miss it for the world." The game was afoot, and Marcus Chen held all the cards. Eleanor Park had never felt smaller than she did sitting in Marcus Chen's office, waiting for him to acknowledge her presence. He continued reading documents for a full 5 minutes after she arrived, a power play that made her squirm in the uncomfortable silence. When he finally looked up, his expression was unreadable. "Mrs. Park, thank you for coming." "Mr. Chen," Eleanor began, her voice barely steady, "I believe there's been a terrible misunderstanding." Marcus raised a hand, silencing her instantly. "Before you continue, I want you to understand something. I've built my fortune by reading people, understanding their motivations, and predicting their actions. So please, don't insult my intelligence with denials." Eleanor's carefully prepared speech died in her throat. "My daughter is the most important thing in my life," Marcus continued, his voice never rising above conversational level. "She's brilliant, accomplished, and kind-hearted despite growing up in a world that constantly questioned her worth because of her race." "Mr. Chen, I never meant—" "You meant every word," Marcus interrupted. "You looked at my daughter and saw someone you considered beneath your family. You treated her with contempt because you assumed she had no power, no connections, no ability to defend herself. Eleanor felt tears threatening, but she blinked them back. Crying would only make this worse. "I could destroy your family's business," Marcus said matter-of-factly. "One phone call to the right people, and Park Industries would be worthless by market close. Your social standing would evaporate overnight." "Please," Eleanor whispered, "I'll do anything to make this right." Marcus studied her for a long moment. "Anything?" "Yes. Then you'll start by learning why your assumptions were so dangerously wrong." He pressed a button on his desk. "Send her in." The door opened and Maya entered, looking every inch the powerful executive she was. Eleanor barely recognized the confident woman as the same person she had dismissed hours earlier. Maya took the seat beside her father, her presence transforming the dynamic in the room completely. Eleanor found herself looking at the young woman with new eyes, seeing past her own prejudices for the first time. "Mrs. Park," Maya said, her voice calm but firm, "I want you to understand something. I didn't pursue your son for his money. I have my own. I didn't seek your approval because I needed validation. I sought it because I loved James and hoped his family could accept me." Eleanor nodded mutely, afraid to speak and make things worse. "I've worked twice as hard as my peers my entire life," Maya continued. "Not because I had to, but because people like you assumed I didn't belong in boardrooms, universities, or upscale restaurants. I've proven myself over and over, only to face the same prejudices from the next person." Marcus watched his daughter with pride. Maya had inherited his business acumen, but possessed a compassion he sometimes lacked. "I could have told you who my father was immediately," Maya said. "I could have name-dropped and watched you scramble to backtrack. But I wanted to see if you could look past your assumptions and see me as a person." "I failed," Eleanor said quietly, the words barely audible. "Yes, you did," Maya agreed. "But failure can be educational if you're willing to learn from it." Eleanor looked up, hope flickering in her eyes. "What can I do to make this right?" Maya exchanged a glance with her father. "You can start by examining why you made those assumptions. Then you can work to ensure other people don't face the same treatment in your social circles." "And James?" Eleanor asked hesitantly. "James is a good man who was raised by someone with outdated prejudices," Maya replied. "He's not responsible for your mistakes, but he'll have to decide if he can build a future with someone whose family treated me with such disrespect." Marcus leaned forward. "Mrs. Park, I'm going to give you an opportunity to prove you've learned something today." Marcus Chen's proposition was both elegant and devastating in its simplicity. Eleanor Park would publicly apologize for her behavior, not just to Maya, but to the broader community. She would also establish a scholarship fund for underprivileged students of color pursuing business degrees, funded by her personal assets, not the family company. "Furthermore," Marcus continued, "you'll serve on the scholarship committee personally, interviewing candidates and learning their stories. Perhaps exposure to their experiences will broaden your perspective." Eleanor felt the weight of true accountability settling on her shoulders. This wasn't just about writing a check. It was about confronting her prejudices head-on and working to undo the damage they had caused. "I accept," she said quietly. Maya studied her future mother-in-law with cautious optimism. "Mrs. Park, I need you to understand that this isn't about punishment, it's about growth. If you and I are going to coexist in James's life, we need to find a way to respect each other." "I understand," Eleanor replied. "Maya, I owe you an apology that goes far deeper than words can express. I judged you based on ignorance and prejudice, and I'm ashamed of my behavior." For the first time since entering the office, Eleanor's apology sounded genuine rather than strategic. James arrived at Maya's apartment that evening, exhausted from a day of damage control and family meetings. He found her on her balcony, looking out over the city lights. "How did it go?" he asked, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "Better than expected," Maya replied, leaning into his embrace. "Your mother has agreed to make amends, but James, this isn't going to be easy. She has a lot of unlearning to do." "Are you willing to give her that chance?" James asked. Maya turned in his arms, studying his face. Are you willing to stand up to her if she backslides? Every single time, James promised. Maya, I love you. My mother's prejudices don't change that. 6 months later, Maya stood in the same conference room where Eleanor Park had first dismissed her, but the atmosphere couldn't have been more different. The Park Industries Board was meeting to approve a major partnership with Chen Capital Management, a deal that would benefit both companies enormously. Eleanor sat at the far end of the table, her demeanor transformed. The scholarship fund she had established was already supporting 12 students, and her work with the recipients had opened her eyes to experiences she had never considered. She still had moments of unconscious bias, but she was learning to recognize and correct them. The partnership proposal is approved unanimously, Richard Park announced, bringing the meeting to a close. As the board members filed out, Eleanor approached Maya hesitantly. Maya, could I speak with you privately? They stepped onto the executive balcony, the same space where Eleanor had once looked down on Maya with contempt. I wanted to thank you, Eleanor said, her voice sincere, for giving me the chance to become a better person. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I'm grateful for your patience. Maya smiled, the first genuinely warm expression she had ever directed at Eleanor. We all have room to grow, Mrs. Park. What matters is that you're willing to do the work. Please, Eleanor said, call me Eleanor, and I hope you'll consider me family. That evening, James proposed to Maya on the same balcony where his mother had once stood in judgment. As Maya said yes, she thought about the journey that had brought them to this moment, the prejudice overcome, the growth achieved, and the love that had survived it all. Eleanor Park had learned that worth wasn't determined by race or background, but by character and actions. Maya Chen had proven that dignity and grace could triumph over ignorance and hate. And James Park had discovered that true love meant standing up for what was right, even when it meant confronting his own family. Their story was just beginning.